Please be seated. Thank you, Sheriff. I do wish to welcome everyone here today on behalf of my fellow judges of the Superior Court and the Columbus Bar Association. I say thank you for joining us today. It appears that everyone can hear me. I know that I can hear myself just fine. Sometimes in the courtrooms where we work, that's very much an open question, so that's why I ask out of long habit. Today does mark the start of the October term of the Superior Court of Muskogee County. We are very glad and very thankful to see everyone who is here today, as well as people who are able to join us on live stream. This program is being live streamed through the website of the Clerk of Superior Court. I will tell you that some acknowledgments are in order, especially in this most unusual year. I do wish to begin by thanking the Sheriff of Muskogee County, Sheriff Donna Tompkins, for all of her assistance. Her unfailing courtesy, her attention to the court, her mindfulness of the safety of the court and of all concerned is much appreciated, and we value her as a fellow public servant. I also wish to thank the management of the River Center and the staff of the River Center, who have played a critical role in setting up this beautiful hall today as you see it. Many hours went into preparing for what is a relatively short hour when we look back at it. But we do need to thank everyone who plays a role in this proceeding. We have made no requests whatsoever of the River Center staff that they have been unable or unwilling to meet. And so it is with heartfelt thanks that all judges join me in thanking the River Center for their unfailing courtesy. Mr. Russell, Judge Peters' court reporter, will also be taking down what is said here today and making a record of it. Mr. Alex Engler, Judge Rumor's law clerk, is tasked with operating the live stream aspect of today's proceeding. I will also introduce your Clerk of Superior Court in Muskogee County, Ms. Danielle Forte, who is here to assist and officiate as a critical officer of this court. We are grateful to her for her assistance. Thank you, Ms. Forte. As I have noted, a record will be made of today's proceeding, as it is every year. It will be spread upon the minutes of this court at the conclusion of today's program. I would like to remind everyone who is here today that this is a special and meaningful program for us here in the Chattahoochee Circuit. This is a joint program, and it is a joint recognition by the bench and bar of this circuit of lawyers and one judge, all colleagues, all friends who have departed during the last year. It is something to which every single member of this bench looks forward as we come and begin the first day of the October term with this as our first item of business: to memorialize, remember, and indeed celebrate departing colleagues for whom we are grateful. I do need to introduce the other judges who are here on the stage with me. I will begin with Judge Bobby Peters, who is on the front row to my right, Judge Art Smith, who is also on the front row. We also have Judge Maureen Gottfried, who is closest to the flag, Judge Ron Mullins, Judge Ben Land, who is here in a double capacity, not only as a judge of Superior Court, but also as the president of the Columbus Bar Association. I should also introduce fellow elected officials and appointed officials who are here. This is always the most dangerous part of the program, but I did ask for folks to let me know if they were going to be here. I see Columbus City Council member John House with his wife. I see Representative Richard Smith. Let's see, do I see Toya Tucker? Toya Tucker from the Columbus City Council is here as well. And then I have a light shining directly in my face, but right there on the far right, I believe we have other elected officials. I believe I see Pastor Jimmy Elder here as well. Always good to see him. If you are here as an elected official or an appointed official, would you please stand at this time? All right, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. I also see Judge D'Antonio from Probate Court. I see Judge Andy Dodgen from Juvenile Court. Is Judge Kennan here as well? Okay. All right, well, I'm unable to see everyone who is in fact here. I would be remiss if I did not recognize our senior judges who are here. They play a very important role and critical role in assisting the active judges of the bench in keeping our courts moving forward, especially in times such as the one in which we find ourselves now. I do see Senior Judge Ken Followell. I see Senior Judge Bill Smith. And I'm told that Senior Judge John Allen was going to join us as well. Sometimes Judge Bellamy joins us from Phoenix City. Is Judge Bellamy here today? All right. Well, at any rate, if I have missed anyone, I apologize. I will tell you that it's difficult sometimes to see everyone from the standpoint of this podium. I do also wish to welcome our former mayor of Columbus, the Honorable Teresa Tomlinson. I saw her as we walked in, and she's sitting here on what is the front row, so it's pretty hard to miss her. So, welcome. At this point, I'm going to move very briefly into some comments about this program, just very few brief words of introduction. I believe most of us are aware that at this hour, courts across the United States are going into session. In Washington, D.C., we are reminded in the news that the Supreme Court of the United States is beginning its new term. The first Monday in October is a significant day in legal practice, and it is a significant day in courts across our land. Here in the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit, it is the long and established custom of our bench and our court to honor and memorialize our fallen colleagues. And so today, we are gathered to commemorate and honor 6 of our friends: Thomas B. Buck III, John D. Cartledge, Nelson C. Coffin, Max R. McGlamry, Ronald W. Self, and Judge E. Mullins Whisnant. At this point, as is our custom, I will call Judge Ben Land, who, as I have previously informed you, is the president of the Columbus Bar Association, and I will ask, Judge Land, do you have business before the court?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you, Judge McBride. May it please the court, judges, lawyers, distinguished guests, and the family members of our departed colleagues. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Columbus Bar Association and our more than 250 active members to the River Center for our annual memorial service. To the River Center staff, we thank you sincerely for letting us borrow your facility during this pandemic. Circumstances are such that we could not convene in our normal location at the Government Center, and our neighbor to the west gladly stepped up in a very neighborly fashion and offered us the use of this facility, and for that we are very grateful. To the family members of our departed colleagues, you have our most sincere condolences, you have our sympathy, and you will remain in our thoughts and prayers. Your loss is our loss, because each of these men that we honor today was an important part of our legal community and an important part of our profession. Thank you for sharing them with us. To the lawyers that are present, both here physically in the River Center and on the internet, who are watching this being live streamed, let this service be a reminder to you of why we are different, what sets us apart as a profession. We have our differences, we fight in the courtroom, we all come from different backgrounds, but we are united by a common bond. That common bond is devotion to the law and the principles of truth, justice, and equality that we all fight for every day. And it is because of that common bond that we pay tribute to our departed colleagues every year. With that being said, at this time, I would like to begin the program and the resolutions by calling upon Madden Hatcher to offer remarks about his longtime friend and our colleague, Tom Buck. Mr. Hatcher.
Good morning. May it please the court, Mr. President, Your Honor, members of the bench and bar assembled here today, members of the family and friends of our deceased brethren, Ms. Susan L. Buck, and members of the Buck family, I offer the following in memory of my friend, Thomas B. Buck III. Tom Buck was born on March 2, 1938, and died on January 2, 2020. He was the eldest son of Violet L. Buck and Thomas B. Buck, Jr., who predeceased him. His younger brothers, Leslie L. Buck and Randolph B. Buck, also predeceased him. He was survived by his beautiful and loving wife, Susan Upchurch Buck, and 3 stepsons, Henry W. Tripp Swift III, Richard Swift, and John Swift, who affectionately referred to Tom as Big Daddy. I first met Tom Buck at Mullins School in the 5th grade kindergarten, and according to my best recollection, he was wearing saddle Oxford shoes at that time. Our friendship lasted from that day forward for over 75 years without there ever being a crossword spoken between us. Tom grew up in a Tom Sawyer-like neighborhood known as Lockwood Avenue. On this street were many young men, some of whom became members of the bar. Among that group of friends was Andrew Bootsy Mullin, Neil B. Littlejohn, Bobby George and Howard Rainey, Jeff Starlin, Jimmy Parks, Jack and George Copeland, George Whitten, and John D. Cartledge. Others who lived close by and visited friends on Lockwood Avenue were Bo Bradley, Bradley Driver, Charlie Dudley, and Sidney Yarborough. Many a football game or baseball game grew out of this group of friends. Following Mullins School, Tom moved on to Columbus High School in the 7th grade and graduated in 1955. While in high school, Tom participated in many activities and played on the 1955 high school championship golf team along with Bootsy Mullin, Neil Littlejohn, and Bradley Driver. Tom's father taught him a strong work ethic. Mr. Buck would always go to work at 6 a.m. at the Dr. Pepper Bottling Company and 7-Up Bottling Company. He would return home at 8 a.m. to have breakfast with his family. Beginning in his teenage years, Tom always had numerous jobs, ranging from packaging groceries at King Grocery Company to delivering soft drinks throughout the city and to Fort Benning. In the spring, Tom and I would cut magnolia blooms from the trees in the Winton area and would sell them to ladies for use in their homes. After graduating from Columbus High School, Tom enrolled at Emory University in their pre-med program. Throughout his 4 years at Emory University, he took and successfully completed every course required for admission to medical school except the last physics course. Many people change their educational plans as they grow older. As often happened, the plans change, and I recall one day in 1/4 of 1955 that we were talking about our future plans, and we decided to meet with the Dean of Admissions at the Emory Law School and find out what the admission requirements were. We met with Dean William B. Agner, who reviewed our records and told us what we needed to do to gain admission the next quarter. At law school, we both accomplished our assignments and were admitted to law school in the fall of 1959. 3 years later, Tom graduated from Emory Law School in 1962 and passed the bar exam. While in law school, Tom shared an apartment with Kenneth B. Fowler, both of whom started their political careers in 1966. Tom as a state legislator and Kenneth as a state court solicitor and later a judge of the Superior Courts of the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit. When they both retired, they had been the longest-serving legislator in Georgia at that time and the longest-serving Superior Court judge. Following law school, Tom went to work with the law firm of Foley and Chappell as an associate, along with Billy Young III, Bo Bradley, and Marshall Andrews. In 1966, Jack T. Brinkley gave up his seat in the Georgia House of Representatives to run for a seat in the United States Congress. Tom sought and obtained the blessings of Judge Foley and Mr. Chappell to run for the seat being vacated by Jack Brinkley. Tom won the election for that seat in the Georgia House of Representatives and thus began a phenomenal legislative career. Tom's character and integrity were tested early. In the 1966 governor's race, Lester Maddox received 46.2% of the vote. Howard B. Bo Calloway received 46.55% of the vote, and Ellis Arnold received 7.08% of the vote. No candidate received a majority, and according to Georgia law at that time, the Georgia House of Representatives was required to elect the governor. Maddox was a Democrat, Calloway a Republican, and Arnold an independent. Tom was a Democrat, but Calloway was from Hamilton, Georgia, and many people from the Columbus area supported Calloway, although they were Democrats. Tom cast his vote for Calloway. Maddox was elected, but Tom, a new legislator, gained considerable respect and admiration of many of his colleagues. Tom's philosophy about being a part of the legislature was to keep his ears open and his mouth shut, a belief that served him and his constituents well for 38 years. Because of his philosophy, Tom was selected by Speaker George C. Smith to chair a committee of the legislature, becoming one of the youngest committee chairs in the history of the Georgia House of Representatives. He was affectionately referred to as the baby chairman. Tom became the dean of the Columbus legislative delegation, and he, along with Calvin Smiley, Pete Robinson, and Ed Harbison, and others, made certain that Columbus, Georgia fared well in Atlanta, Georgia under the Gold Dome. Through Tom's efforts, with the help of others from the Columbus delegation, Columbus, Georgia can be thankful for the Civic Center, the River Center for the Performing Arts, the Riverwalk, improvements to Columbus Iron Works Convention and Trade Center, Springer Opera House, and Columbus State University. During their 38 years in the Georgia legislature, Tom served as a member of and chairman of the House Retirement Committee, the House University System Committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, and the House Appropriations Committee. He was also a member of the Powerful Rules Committee of the House. At the time of his retirement, he was chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Tom was not one to brag about his relationships, but he was on a first-name basis with most, if not all, of the governors of Georgia under whom he served. He also had the ear of Speaker Tom Murphy, one of the most powerful politicians to have served in Georgia in recent years. In 2004, Tom, a Democrat, was approached by the Republican leadership in the House and asked to change parties. He was promised the position of Speaker of the House if he would switch parties. Tom took the offer under consideration, and after giving it careful thought, he turned the offer down. His reason for rejecting the offer was that the party that had been so loyal to him would consider it a rejection on his part if he changed parties. Once he retired, he and Susan, along with family and friends, enjoyed their beachside villa at the King and Prince Hotel, St. Simon's Island, where he could play golf, read, and enjoy a life well lived. Tom Buck was a son of Columbus, a statesman of Georgia, and a loyal friend to many. Rest in peace, my friend. May it please the court, I move that this resolution be unanimously adopted by the members of the Columbus Bar Association, that it be spread upon the minutes of the Honorable Superior Court of Muskogee County, and that appropriate copies be provided to the family of Thomas B. Buck III. Respectfully submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatcher. Now to remember John Cartledge, we have his longtime friend and former partner, Jim Moy. Mr. Moy.
In the matter of John Dudley Cartledge, born January 20, 1938, died September 13, 2019, in memoriam. May it please the court, members of the bar, Carolyn, Lucy, Wills, and Issy, who are here today. It is my honor and privilege to present this memorial for John Dudley Cartledge. Predestination is generally considered to be Presbyterian theology, and John would have known that theology. For the first 20 years of his life, his family was a member of First Presbyterian Church of Columbus. My family and his have been around each other for about 150 years. The first recorded interaction that I know of is in the journal of my great-great-grandfather, on November 23, 1874. Mr. Dean and John Cartledge came to the schoolhouse. That is John D. Cartledge, John Dawson Cartledge, 1852 to 1911. John Dawson Cartledge married my cousin Sarah Dean, and they were buried in the Cartledge Dean Cemetery, originally located on the site of the Thesis campus on Moon Road, now relocated to Park Hill Cemetery. Presently, John Dawson Cartledge and John Dudley Cartledge are resting about 100 yards apart from each other in Park Hill Cemetery. From 1874 until present, there was lots of interaction between the families. If I was to be a lawyer, perhaps it was predestined that I would practice with John Dudley Cartledge, with whom I did practice 1976 to 2013. John was born in Columbus, Georgia, the only child of Mary Lou Cartledge and Emmett B. Cartledge Jr. Some in the room and watching remotely, age 60 or older, knew Emmett, a successful lawyer in town for some 30 years before John joined the firm. Mary Lou Cartledge has been described as one of the kindest, gentlest mothers that could be, mitigating in John some of the intransigence of Emmett. John grew up in Winton, as earlier noted. Imagine an episode of The Little Rascals, starring future lawyers of Columbus, Tom Buck, John Cartledge, Madden Hatcher, Neil Littlejohn. This is alphabetical order, not necessarily in order of notoriety, though it may have been. Tom, John, and Neil all lived in the same street and man just a few blocks away. The Cartledge home always had boys around. Mary Lou was a Cub Scout den mother. Some kids have basketball goals or tree houses in their yard, but John had a tank, a wooden replica of a military tank. The tank had been a prop to encourage purchase of war bonds, was parked on Broadway during World War II, and John's father got it to the house after the war so the boys could play war games. It was in high school that John's attention to fine detail began to form. When he started a project, he was determined to reach his goal. He assembled a matchbook collection. He achieved the rank of Eagle Scout through the Boy Scout troop that was sponsored by First Presbyterian Church. His support of scouting continued into his adult life. Another intricate talent that John lived in high school was playing the guitar. This was a revelation to me. I did not know the man had a musical bone in his body. He never hummed, whistled, or showed any interest in music around the office. His teacher to learn the guitar was Ken Followill. During high school and college days, he was one of 3 members of the Fargo Boys, the other 2 boys being Ken Followill, also on the guitar, and Bobby Rainey on the banjo. John was one of 10 boys from Columbus High School class of 1955 that matriculated to Emory University. John's roommate was Fred Dismute, and directly across the hall from them in the freshman dorm was Tom Buck and Madden Hatcher. John progressed through college and law school on a 6-year plan, 3 years undergraduate, 3 years law school, and upon completion of the 6th, he achieved a BA degree and an LLB degree. John did get his 3 undergraduate years at Emory, 2 years of law school at Emory, and the 3rd year of law school at the University of Georgia. Rumor has it that John's dad was dissatisfied with the grades John was getting at the cost of an Emory tuition, so father sent him to a state school. But that 1 year at University of Georgia was a seed for lifelong support of the Georgia Bulldogs. Bulldog Club season ticket holder. While at Emory, John was a member of Kappa Alpha Order and Alpha Phi Omega Service Fraternity, modeled on the Boy Scout oath and laws. John passed the bar exam in 1960 and was admitted to the bar that year at age 22. He graduated from the University of Georgia School of Law in 1961 and returned home to practice with the law firm then known as Cartledge, Denny, and Pease. That is John Denny and Bunky Pease. Per Bunky, it was clear that the future of the firm was going to be John and his father, and John, Denny, and Bunky Pease moved on to their own outstanding careers. John served in the Army National Guard for 6 years, with his duties including postal clerk. In his law practice, John became well known as an authority on real property law, fiduciary law, personal and fiduciary tax law. The law firms of Cartledge and Starlin and Followill did all of the legal work for First Federal Savings and Loan Association of Columbus, the largest savings and loan association in town, back when it was closed shop for the lawyer providers. In addition to his law practice, John found time to give back to the state bar. John was one of the contributors to the first edition of Title Standards. The Title Standards, plus Pinder's Real Estate Law Treatise, are references every dirt lawyer has at hand even to this day. He served as chair of the Real Property Law Section of the State Bar of Georgia, 1971 to 1972. John served as president of the Columbus Lawyers Club, 1979 to 1980. John was one of the founding directors and president for several years of Attorney's Title Guarantee Fund, a state bar-related title insurance agency, formed to give lawyers who were lower producers of title insurance premiums access to work as an issuing agent. He was a member and past chair of the Columbus Estate Planning Council, member and officer of Columbus Lions Club, and volunteered with other local civic groups. John loved practicing law and his clients. He had the knowledge to be various other professionals. He understood life insurance. He understood investment securities and was often called on by his clients in preference to their own broker for advice to buy and sell. He could do math in his head as rapidly as a CPA. Above all, he would give clients his time, perhaps to a fault, because it put him behind on other projects. John was perceived to be gruff to attorneys who did not know him and was usually right on issues concerning real estate titles and income taxes. Nevertheless, he was inclined to compromise and secure a satisfactory resolution for his client. Other lawyers, you know, spent formative legal years around John, including Frank Martin, Jim Patrick, Harold Posey, Andy Prather, Brandy Hett. Harold Posey was his partner for 30 years. John did have a dry sense of humor. When he spoke, it was often unfiltered. One did not know what was going to come out of his mouth. One illustrative statement I can share. John once attended a country funeral in the summer, and when asked how hot it was, this was his reply: "It was 2 doors from hell." When I started practice, lawyers then checked their own titles, and John maintained a good relationship with the record room staff. At Christmas, John would haul a cart of select liquor to the record room personnel, carefully selected by John for what he thought each employee would like. The liquid gift would be accompanied by a Christmas card purportedly signed by some other record room lawyer, named to remain anonymous. Working with John could be some exasperating, for he was often a last-minute guy, but he cared for his staff. Staff worked for him 30, 40, 50 years, and he was loyal to them and to me. When he did retire, he expressed to me that he was concerned that I would continue to be successful as a sole practitioner. With the foundation of those years around John, he made it so. Outside of the office, John was a leader in his church, St. Luke United Methodist Church. He was a long-term Sunday school teacher. One church observer described his knowledge of scriptures as intimidating by its expansiveness and thoroughness. John liked to have fun with his family. We at the office admired the fun of John and his wife Carolyn. In addition to his wife Carolyn, John is survived by his children, Lawrence Cartledge, Ann Cartledge, and Lucy Gates, and 5 grandchildren. Carolyn complimented John perfectly. She was the straight man, providing graciousness over John's rough edges. Together, John and Carolyn traveled to their mountain home, grew vegetables, attended UGA football games, loved their dogs, fished, and reminisced with his high school friends. John was a great lawyer, mentor and comrade to other lawyers, teacher, leader, husband, father, grandfather. His life was formed by the intensity of his father, the kindness of his mother, and the graciousness of his wife. This community and the practicing of law in Columbus and in the state of Georgia have been permanently enriched by the leadership and attention to detail that was John Dudley Cartledge. Your Honors, on behalf of the Columbus Bar Association, I pray that this memorial be spread upon the minutes of this court and that a copy of it be furnished to the family of our departed brother, John Dudley Cartledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moy. Now to remember another longtime member of our bar, Nelson Coffin, we have Milton Jones. Mr. Jones?
In the Superior Court for the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit, memorial resolution in honor and memory of Nelson Clements Coffin III. May it please the court. Back in the 1940s and 50s, there was a highly respected New York City lawyer named Harrison Tweed. He was also a leader in the American Bar Association, and he wrote a piece one time in which he said, quote, "I have a high opinion of lawyers. With all their faults, they stack up well against those in every other occupation or profession. They are better to work with, to play with, fight with, or drink with than most other varieties of mankind." I don't think that Mr. Tweed was of kin to the Tweed of Tammany Hall infamy, but I do think he may have met Nelson somewhere along the road. Nelson was born September the 25th, 1930 in Cuthbert to Nelson Clements Coffin, Jr. I guess that figures that third is son of Jr. And Carolyn Cheeves Coffin. He attended Emory University, graduating in 1951. He then entered the United States Army, in which he served in heavy combat and as an infantryman in Korea. After his discharge in 1953, he entered the University of Georgia Law School, from which he graduated in 1957. Nelson always loved his Bulldogs, and with all due respect to Judge Smith, he would be very happy after Saturday's victory over Auburn. He began his practice as a sole practitioner in Columbus and eventually joined with his friend Jack Brinkley to form the firm of Coffin and Brinkley. He retired from the practice after 40 years and returned to Cuthbert. He is survived by his wife, Martha Ann Meadows Coffin, and stepdaughter Ann Hurd Stanford of Cuthbert, as well as 3 grandchildren, Stuart, Karen, and Amelia. The late 1950s and early 60s, as you've just heard, saw a number of young lawyers come to Columbus, but at rather a slow rate, maybe 1, maybe 2, sometimes none, a year. But the bar has grown exponentially since that time. My best recollection, agreed with by several of my contemporaries, was that there were about 100 lawyers, including a dozen or so of us younger ones, who practiced in the late 50s and early 60s, and who became the nucleus for the Younger Lawyers Club, now called Division. We then younger lawyers were a pretty social group. There were a couple of coffee groups in the morning, one up at the Rawson Hotel of recent problems, and the other the Martin Eaton Motor Hotel, and 2 or 3 gatherings of various beer joints and about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This was back in the time, believe it or not, when you could not buy a mixed drink in the state of Georgia. We were, for the most part, good friends. We exchanged gossip, kidded back and forth about who lost and or won what case that week. But we had one firm rule. You could brag for one day about a victory, but then you had to shut up. With the exception of 2 or 3 lawyers in town, you could take the word of any other without asking for it in writing. And we all knew who those other guys were, and needless to say, they were not part of our crowd. I do not mean to convey the idea that we took it easy on one another. We all knew that we were in an adversarial profession, and we represented our clients to the best of our abilities. But we did it honorably and ethically. We had a lot of fun, and Nelson was one of our leaders. Judge Ben Lynn, the president of the Columbus Bar Association, says now that we have about 250 dues-paying members, and perhaps that many who are not members, a 5-to-1 increase in 60 years. As to the number of the lawyers in the state, we went over the 3,000 mark, according to what I was told in 1959 when I passed the bar. Today, the state of Georgia has over 52,000 lawyers, including 40 active and in good standing, a 13-to-1 increase in 60 years. The demographics of the bar has changed even more dramatically than the numbers, and for the better. There was one female student at Emory Law School when I was there from 1957 to 1959. There were 2 female members of the Columbus Bar when I came home. Judge Polly Lamar, who was a juvenile court judge, and the other being Martha Suggs, who was the secretary to the 2 superior court judges, which was all we had at that time. There was one African American, Albert Thompson, who was later elected to the Georgia House of Representatives in 1965. I sat beside Albert on the floor of the House in Atlanta, and we became close friends. Back to our group of younger lawyers. Nelson was definitely one of our leaders. Not only was he one of the older, if not the oldest of us, he was very intelligent and everyone liked him. I never knew of anyone who had any complaint with anything Nelson ever did. He was certainly no saint, but he did have a spiritual side. He was a member of Cuthbert United Methodist Church, where he enjoyed singing in the choir, and he served in many other capacities in his church. Nelson was a very deep person. He was a great golf course philosophizer, according to one of his courtmates and close friends, Bill Hardigreat. Bill remembers examples of what he calls coffinisms on the course. One day after bogeying a hole, Nelson asked, "Have you ever noticed how the ball slows down just before it gets to the hole?" Another golfer responded, "If you hit it harder, it will go in the hole, Nelson." Nelson replied, "It does the same thing, except it goes past the hole. My balls never go in the hole." Judge Followill recalls Nelson's leadership efforts on getting the Younger Lawyers Group started here in Columbus. The clerk of the Court of Appeals in Atlanta would send out by mail, that's snail mail. Bear in mind, this was in the days before emails, the internet, and even fax machines. They'd send out copies of opinions that had been recently decided about important cases of the appellate courts. They were called advanced sheets and were ostensibly read and discussed at our 5 o'clock beer meetings. So in an attempt to add some dignity to our group, we started calling ourselves the Advanced Sheet Society. It was not long before one of our erudite members realized that the acronym for that august body was ASS, and that could not be. Bear in mind that much of this was going on before the incorporation of the state bar in 1964. Its name back then was the Georgia Bar Association, and it was a social organization in the language of that period. But it did have a younger lawyers branch called the Georgia Bar Association Younger Lawyers Section. And we decided it would add to the prestige of our afternoon beer gatherings to get a charter from that group. That necessitated a drafting committee of which all of us volunteered to be members. This led to the necessity of several trips around the Southeast to review the charters of other states' Younger Lawyers Group. We made several trips over to Phoenix City to check on Alabama's. We went to Panama City. We went to Hilton Head and checked all these southeastern charters. Finally, the drafting effort was completed, but another problem was discovered. The state organization's charter specified that you aged out at 36, and Nelson was approaching 36. Bunky Pease moved that the charter be placed on the dead docket, and there it still rests as far as anyone knows. So members of the Younger Lawyers Division, you have a noble heritage. Nelson also served the Younger Lawyers section of the Columbus Lawyers Club by being in charge of all the liquor. He rode around town with all of it stacked up in his back seat. He said that way he could keep an eye on it. But Nelson was also a Renaissance man, a person with many talents or areas of knowledge, or a man for all seasons, to referred to Sir Thomas More. Or while using trite expressions, please allow me one more. He marched to the beat of a different drummer. However, in all seriousness, Nelson was truly, truly brilliant. He was conversant in several foreign languages. He read the entire Bible in Greek, and he loved to work algebra and calculus problems, and we loved Nelson. But he was definitely different. Being as it is an election year, Judge Followill was called to mind of one night a group gathered at Nelson's home to listen to the election returns. It was November. It was cold, but Nelson wouldn't turn the heat on. He passed out blankets. Respectfully submitted, Thomas Milton Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Now for remarks and memories of another longtime member of our local bar, Max McGlamry, we have his partner and his friend, Trip Tomlinson.
May it please the court. Good morning to my fellow members of the Columbus Bar Association and to the families and friends of all of those lawyers to whom we pay tribute today. Good morning to all of our judges, and thank you for your service to the rule of law. And good morning to all of our other distinguished guests. It is my privilege and honor to speak this morning about Max McGlamry, my former law partner, mentor, and longtime family friend. I do so on behalf of his wife, Jean, his children, Mike and Sharon, and his grandchildren, Caroline, Kate, Elizabeth, Justin, and Max, and on behalf of all of those who knew him. In particular, among so many others who knew and worked closely with Max, I must mention those who I know miss his wise counsel and his friendship: Neil Pope, Paul Kilpatrick, Tim Morrison, and my wife Teresa, among so many others. In fact, Teresa often tells the story of having been assigned a difficult research project, sitting down with Max to report she couldn't find a way to accomplish the desired result. "The law is a tool for justice," he said, sitting at his desk with his clear eyes. "If you can't find a way, you aren't looking hard enough." That was Max. He loved the law, and in it he saw a vehicle to assert the rights of his clients, but always with an understanding of a lawyer's duty to the court and to the judicial system. Advocacy and candor were the guidepost I learned from Max. Max was born September 12, 1928. He graduated as valedictorian from Phoenix City's Central High School at the age of 15. He attended what is now Auburn University, graduating in 1948. If you knew Max, you knew he was a War Eagle through and through. He served as an ensign in the United States Navy, after which Max went to Mercer Law School, receiving his JD in 1953, the year I was born. Not long thereafter, Max moved to Columbus. He put out his own shingle. He had an office in the old Empire Building, and he practiced with Mr. Theo McGee. Eventually, he became a partner in two of Columbus's finest law firms, Page, Scranum, Harris, McGlamry, and Chapman, and Pope, McGlamry, Kilpatrick and Morrison. Both firms were fortunate to have him. Speaking about Max, I heard Neil say more times than I can count, "Whenever I'm in a tough lawsuit, in a tough battle, there is no one I want in the foxhole with me more than Max McGlamry." And Max wanted to be there. He enjoyed the good battle and the seemingly insurmountable odds. I recall many an evening after a long day in court, sitting in a conference room with Max and Neil and Mike and others, discussing that day and planning for court the next day over dinner. Max was the much-needed, stern taskmaster during such times, bringing all of us back to our legal theories and our burden and our evidence. And if we were at the stage of preparing jury charges, well, for Max, that was serious business. What was the evidence? What was the law? He demanded thoroughness and accuracy and creativity. But always a big part of those evenings were the stories and the laughter. Max had a great laugh, and he was surprisingly mischievous, and he succeeded in his mischief in the way that only a smart, serious person can, by suddenly going against type. I recall back in the early 1990s, Mike and I came from a hearing in federal court to learn that Neil was having a heart transplant. Max was rock solid, steadying the ship for those next several months. And then when the worst was past, there was Max, surprising Neil and the rest of us with funny hats, stories, and other silliness. Max liked a good time. He was also a prolific note-taker. He had notebooks filled with lead pencil scribble that chronicled everything dating back years and years and years. It was serious business. The good news for all of us is those notes are under lock and key, only to be released in the year 2050. Max's family, the McGlamrys and the Faircloths, owned property in Pitts, Georgia, what Max called the family farm. Until he was unable to travel, Max attended and loved the family reunions they held there. His family meant the world to him, and what a wonderful family. Max was a successful lawyer, yes, but importantly, he left a legacy with his 2 children and 5 successful grandchildren. In addition to his family and the law, Max loved golf. He played with several groups over the year, but in particular, he and Jean played together for years, traveling to courses around the South to play with and compete against other couples. They were married nearly 70 years, and they were a formidable team, on and off the course. I close with a note of personal privilege. Max is the reason I am a lawyer with Pope McGlamry. Max and my father were great friends. My dad died way too young, but unbeknownst to me, Max followed my development as a lawyer. One day, as I approached the end of a clerkship with Judge Albert Henderson, I received a call completely out of the blue. It was Max, and he invited me to interview for a position with the firm. I did, and now 30 plus years later, Pope McGlamry is the only law firm I have ever worked with. I learned from him. He made me and everyone around him a better lawyer. And together, with all of those at the firm, we did some great things. We took on tough cases, representing injured persons and small businesses against big corporations with lots of resources. Max pushed us and demanded that we give our clients the very best representation possible. We could not have succeeded as often as we did without Max's skill, tenacity, and resolve. He did, in fact, make the law a tool for justice. Thank you, Max. With the court's leave, and on behalf of Jean and Mike, Sharon, and the rest of the McGlamry family, I move that this memorial be included in the minutes and permanent records of the court. Respectfully submitted. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Mr. Tomlinson. As somebody who spent many hours in the courtroom against Mr. Tomlinson, against Mike, and against other members of that firm, I can tell you from firsthand experience that Max McGlamry was very effective in his training of this next generation of lawyers. At this time, I will call on fellow Judge Ron Mullins to offer remarks concerning his longtime friend and partner, Ron Self.
Fellow judges, members of the Columbus Bar Association, members of the family of Ron Self, guests and friends, the definition of a Renaissance man or woman is a person who is well educated and sophisticated and has talent and knowledge in many different fields of study. Starting with that premise is perhaps the best way to remember our friend Ron Self and to understand him in the course of his life. A native of Hurtsboro, Alabama, he received his bachelor's degree from Birmingham Southern College in 1970. While an undergraduate there, he met and married Sharon Williams. The ongoing war in Vietnam led to his being drafted and his service in the United States Army until 1972, when he was honorably discharged. He subsequently received his law degree from the University of Alabama in 1976. His first job after law school was with the Columbus firm of Kelly, Champion, Denny and Pease, later changed to Kelly, Denny, Pease and Allison, where he practiced with Ed Kelly, Forrest Champion, John Denny, Bunky Pease, Ray Allison, Ernie Kirk, Phil Johnson, Joel Wooten, Joe Whitley, Alan Levi, Pete Robinson, and others. Like many of his partners, Ron worked in the areas of civil litigation, defense of workers' compensation cases, and appellate practice. In 1991, he and I and Pete Robinson started the firm of Self, Mullins, and Robinson, which eventually became Self, Mullins, Robinson, Marchetti, and Kaminsky, with 15 attorneys, many of whom are here today. After 7 years with that diverse group, we shrank to the two-person firm of Self, Mullins. One of the greatest privileges of my life was being in the same firm with Ron for over 2 decades, and I became a better lawyer, and I trust a better person because of my friendship with him. He remains one of the smartest people I've ever known. He had a curious streak. He was a voracious reader. He had a large measure of common sense and what people would nowadays call emotional intelligence. He brought all of those qualities and more to the practice of law, and it made him one of the best attorneys to practice in our circuit in recent memory. He tried more civil cases than anyone I've ever known. He became the go-to guy for defense of workers' compensation cases. He consistently got excellent results for his clients. We as attorneys are highly opinionated about everything and can tend toward being argumentative and cantankerous on occasion. Yet in all my years of practice with Ron, I can't recall anyone saying anything bad about him. He was consistently kind to opposing counsel, respectful of the judges that he encountered, and considerate of the feelings of his clients. He quickly obtained an AV rating from Martindale-Hubbell because he was a professional to the core. He was one of the premier plaintiff's attorneys in Columbus told me this story. He was trying a case involving a contract. Ron was defending the matter. This attorney rested his case after a day and a half of a jury trial. Before presenting his side of the case, Ron asked the court for a short break. He then had a brief private conversation with plaintiff's counsel and told him that he had not introduced the contract into evidence as part of the plaintiff's case. He then asked opposing counsel if he wanted to reopen the plaintiff's case and tender the contract into evidence. But if we focused solely on Ron's work as an attorney, we would have missed the other parts of his life that made him such an amazing person. He was deeply devoted to his 2 sons, Jeremy and Stephen, and that led him to his role as a Cub Scout and Boy Scout leader. Over the years, he served at many levels, including district chair, while he poured himself into his sons and the other young men that he met through scouting. He was, in his own way, the ultimate Boy Scout. He was the kind of person that you could entrust with a bag of gold. If you asked for the gold years later, not one coin would have been missing. And did I mention that he was one of the most well-read persons I've ever known? He loved books. He loved reading through book catalogs and ordering more books. His personal library was a wonder to behold. He told me about finishing a title that intrigued him, finding in it, buying the book, and then starting to read it a few months later. After the first 10 pages or so, he realized that he already bought the book years earlier and had read it previously. And did I mention that he was one of the most kind-hearted persons I think I've ever known? Ron was a member of the Columbus Rotary Club for over 38 years. In the late 1990s, a young woman came to his door at his home on Lower Broadway, asking for money to buy milk for herself and her young child. He helped her out, and that encounter led him to make a proposal to the Board of Trustees for the Rotary Club to place empty soup cans on the tables at the weekly meeting at the Trade Center and encourage the members to put their pocket change in the cans. The trustees wisely agreed. Coins eventually became quieter money in the form of dollar bills. The funds went to local organizations like House of Mercy, Valley Rescue Mission, and Feeding the Valley that help fight hunger in our area. At last count, Rotarians have contributed over $150,000 because Ron Self had a soft heart and a good idea. And did I mention that his last full-time job was at Columbus State University, where he was a lecturer in the Turner College of Business. He taught courses in business law, environment of business, and introduction to business, while still practicing law part-time and working as a certified civil mediator. While not the most authoritative source, the website Rate My Professor yielded the following comments from his students. Quote, Mr. Self is teaching to give back and help the next generation. He gave us lessons in both business and life. I really enjoyed having him as my professor. Quote, amazing teacher. If everyone had the dedication this professor had, school would be a different place. Quote, Mr. Self always starts out his class with the phrase, here are the facts, then proceeds with whatever his moral of the story is. He relates that story for the main idea of the class that day. I found it amusing but very interesting, and I would 100% take his class again. And did I mention that Ron was an accomplished poet? For 2 years he was president of the Georgia Poetry Society. He won several national poetry competitions with his submissions. He published 2 volumes of his work, Rich Man's Son and Requiem for the Unconvinced. He arranged and presided over open mic poetry events in the Columbus area, moderated poetry workshops, and invited some of you to attend those events and read one of your favorite poems. I don't think he ever got over the fact that I like the poetry of Ogden Nash. He was a founding organizer of the Chattahoochee Valley Writers Conference and served as its chair for several years. And did I mention that cooking added joy to his life? His New Year's Day brunch for neighbors and friends at his home was legendary. He was always experimenting with new dishes. He catered multiple events and parties. I haven't read his last will and testament, but I am hoping that he left me his recipe for chocolate bread pudding with whiskey sauce. And did I mention that music played a large part in his life? An accomplished pianist and organist, he played for his first church service in 1961 at the age of 14. For more than 50 years, he played the organ at various local churches, including a tenure of 40 years at Somerville United Methodist Church in Phoenix City. Even a Renaissance man can have his limitations. Although Ron was a graduate of the University of Alabama, I never heard him say anything positive or negative about the Crimson Tide. I'm pretty sure he knew who Bear Bryant was and who Nick Saban is, but he just didn't care. As far as I know, he never attended an SEC football game. His athletic endeavors were more along the lines of creating the Pine Mountain Ambulation. Participants would start at the WJSP television tower near Warm Springs and ambulate in the direction of the country store at Callaway Gardens. All you had to do to get the shirt was start moving in that direction, on foot, on a bike, by hitchhiking, or by car. That event was typical of his sense of humor, which helped him and many of us get through the difficult days of life and law practice. If you ever came to his office, you were aware that he had a growing collection of legal cartoons hanging on the walls. With the permission of my fellow judges, we hope to place some of those in the courthouse. I've brought with me my favorite one from his collection today. It shows a couple of potential heirs in the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The attorney is holding the will, and the heirs lawyers are listening with a distressed look as the lawyer says, I, Emperor Dwayne VI of Nebraska, being of sound mind. Ron is survived by his wife Sharon, his sons Jeremy and Stephen and their wives, and multiple grandchildren. He loved them all, spoke of them often, and his passing leaves a great void in all of their lives. Sharon perhaps said it best. Ron was a quiet man, an ethical man, a caring man, a generous man, and a good man. Our lives are richer because through a kind providence we crossed his path. There may have been a better lawyer, a better poet, a better scout leader, a better musician, a better person in the world, but if so, I never met that individual. I leave you with the words that Ron added to one of the last emails I received from him, a quote from the English philosopher and jurist Jeremy Bentham. Create all the happiness you are able to create. Remove all the misery you are able to remove. Every day will invite you to add something to the pleasure of others or to diminish something of their pains. I make this submission in honor and memory of my good friend Ron Self and request that it be filed with the Clerk of Superior Court of Muskogee County, Georgia. Respectfully submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Mullins. Our last honoree, but certainly not the least, would be Judge E. Mullins Whisnant. And before I introduce our speaker, I would just like to make a personal statement about Judge Whisnant. He swore me into the practice of law 28 years ago, and he greeted me on the 4th floor of the Government Center after I had been sworn in as a Superior Court judge. These judges that are seated here with me today saw fit to put the new baby judge on the 4th floor surrounded by 2 senior judges, Judge Whisnant and Judge Kenneth Followell. And how smart was that? To have their wisdom, to have their experience, and to have their judgment was invaluable to me. And yes, in his 90th year, Judge Whisnant came to the Government Center. And yes, he came quite regularly. And yes, he offered advice. He loved people, he loved judges, and he loved the law. And I cherish those 2 years that I got to spend with him sharing office space at the Government Center. Here to remember Judge Whisnant and the legacy he left is our former District Attorney, Gray Conger.
Eliza Mullins Whisnant was a leap year child. Born February 29, 1928, the son of George Thomas and Lydia Mullins Whisnant in Waverly Hall, Georgia. He was raised on a farm, and while his career carried him to the State House and the courthouse, he never forgot his agrarian roots. He visited his home place regularly until the day of his death. He kept a herd of cattle until his physical infirmities forced him to give it up. Upon graduating from Waverly Hall High School, Mullins entered in Mercer University, receiving his LLB degree in 1950, and was admitted to the bar that same year at the age of 22. Just as with his home place, Mullins remained fiercely loyal to his alma mater. He supported the university financially, maintained contact with his classmates, and was particularly excited when he learned that Mercer was establishing a medical school in Columbus. His greatest thrill, however, came when Mercer reestablished his football program. He attended the inaugural game, and though he was able to attend only a few others, he remained a season ticket holder for the rest of his life. On more than one occasion, he called the Columbus Ledger, expressing his displeasure over their failure to cover the Mercer Bears. Upon graduation, Mullins entered the U.S. Army during the Korean War. After completion of his service, he established a law practice in Hamilton and later in Columbus, where he joined his friend and mentor, Dan Beeland. In 1960, Mullins was elected to represent the Harris and Talbot County in the 25th District in the Georgia Senate. Among his accomplishments there was his service on the Criminal Law Study Committee, which drafted the Criminal Code of Georgia that was adopted by the General Assembly and remains in effect today. On June 1, 1970, Mullins was appointed District Attorney of the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit following the abrupt midterm retirement of his predecessor, Mr. W.B. Skipworth. He inherited an office in somewhat disarray, with one assistant who had 1 year of experience and 2 investigators who faced an overwhelming backlog of cases, an overcrowded jail population, and an election contest in 3 months, with the unsuccessful candidate for appointment of the DA's office. He not only survived these challenges, he thrived. Within 3 years, he would hire 3 assistants, Bill Smith, Doug Pullen, and me, Gray Conger. Each of these men would succeed him in that order, continuing to administer the office upon the foundation laid by Mullins. Collectively, we would fill the district attorney's position in the circuit for 40 years. To each of them, he would become not only a mentor, but a close friend, taking a strong interest not only in their careers, but in their personal lives as well. A lawyer from Atlanta once filed a motion in a case in which he stated the district attorney's office of the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit is like a family business handed down from father to son. The observation was not intended as a compliment, but we took it as such. Due to the limited number of assistants, the number of counties in the circuit, the unusual number of bad crimes which occurred during his tenure, and a new capital punishment framework enacted by the General Assembly, Mullins took his regular term in the assignment of cases for prosecution. The final case he prosecuted personally was the first case tried in Georgia with television cameras and newspaper photographers allowed in the courtroom. 43 years later, we are accustomed to the pressure of the presence of the media. It is difficult to describe the stress that this added to this already high-profile case. Mullins came through like a champion. We hear a great deal about the sacrifices those in public office make, and Mullins Whisnant, as district attorney, made a significant sacrifice. His home in rural Harris County was burned and completely destroyed by an arsonist. Though sufficient evidence was never developed to prosecute the case, law enforcement identified the perpetrator as an individual that he had prosecuted for a misdemeanor in Harris County. Fortunately, no one was at home on the night of the fire, but not one item could be saved. Not a single personal memento, family photograph, or article of clothing. On January 4th, 1978, Mullins Whisnant was sworn in as judge of Superior Court of the Chattahoochee Circuit after being appointed by Governor George Busby. He smoothly made the transition from DA to judge, despite the platform that the position offered. He never prosecuted from the bench. Neither did he involve himself in either side of a civil case. He was not a plaintiff's judge or a defendant's judge. He simply called balls and strikes and let the lawyers try their cases. I have never seen or heard of him being rude to a lawyer in the courtroom. The first requirement of a judge is to have good judgment, and he was blessed with this attribute in abundance. In 1989, he became the chief judge of the circuit, supervising other judges of equal rank who are independent creatures by nature is somewhat of a challenge. But like the others that he faced during his career, he met it head on with respect to his colleagues and a heavy dose of common sense. His tenure has been referred to by some as the era of good feeling among the judges. He was also elected by his fellow judges of the region to serve as administrative judge for the 3rd Judicial Administrative District, encompassing the Chattahoochee, Macon Southwestern, and Houston circuits, and as a member of the Executive Committee of the Council of Superior Court Judges. Perhaps his most recent lasting contribution as judge was to oversee the establishment of the Alternative Dispute Resolution Program for the district. Mediation changed the practice of law as much as any other thing that occurred during his career, and he played a central role in establishing the program. After his retirement in 1995, Judge Whisnant continued to be active as a senior judge, trying cases in circuits throughout the state. He also qualified as a mediator, and using the experience and wisdom, assisted the court, lawyers, and parties in resolving hundreds of cases. Judge Whisnant said that the primary reason he enjoyed mediation was that it kept him in touch with the bar. He enjoyed the company of lawyers. He was proud to be a lawyer. He was old school and firmly believed that a lawyer ought to dress like a lawyer, coat and tie for men, whether in court or in the office. The story is told that a lawyer dressed casually in his own office on a Friday afternoon made a decision to drop some papers by the judge's office on his way home. Although fully aware of the judge's attitude on dress, the lawyer was not concerned because it was his only intention to deliver the documents, and he had no cause to see the judge. While conversing with the secretary, though, the judge heard his voice and called for him to come back to his office for a visit. Upon seeing the lawyer's dress, the judge good-naturedly admonished him. He once refused to administer an oath to be admitted to the bar to a young man who had unknowingly come in casual dress, sending him home to change clothes. For those who think only of Mullins as a stern DA or judge, please know that he did have a great sense of humor. This was exemplified in a hog stealing case, which he prosecuted in Marion County. Mullins' close friend and classmate, J. Walter Owens, was a large man representing the defendant. During the trial, the identity of the hog became an issue, and the accused had sold it as a livestock auction. Walter, in cross-examining the owner, had gotten him to estimate the weight of the hog, and his estimate was about 50 pounds more than the auction receipt showed. To counter this in closing, Mullins argued that a 50-pound differential was not unreasonable in estimating the weight of a hog, and then added, Mr. Owens couldn't even guess his own weight within 50 pounds. This, of course, brought Walter to his feet, exclaiming, "Your Honor, he's comparing me to a hog." Mullins leaves his wife of 27 years, Mary Jane, and his daughter Becky Sue Roddenberry and son John Whisnant, 3 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. He was a member of the First Baptist Church of Columbus and treasured his relationship with his pastor and fellow Mercer alumnus, Reverend Jimmy Elder, often offering critiques on his sermons. While Mullins was loyal to his home place, his university, his profession, his family, and his faith, he also loved and was loyal to Aflac. Becky Sue tells the story that once Mullins was in the hospital, not doing well, and he was dictating his obituary to her. They were suddenly interrupted by a call from his broker telling him that Aflac had just announced a stock split. The dictation was discontinued, and Mullins lived for several more months. He will be missed. He was a great lawyer, a great judge, a great district attorney. Your Honor, I move that this memorial be placed upon the minutes of the court and that copies be furnished to each of the family members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Conger. Judge McBride, at this time, on behalf of the Columbus Bar Association, I would formally move that the resolutions that were presented here today be admitted as part of the permanent record of this court.
Thank you, Judge Land. Your motion will be granted, and I will enter an order that directs that each of these resolutions that have been presented here today be spread upon the minutes of this court. Do you have further business?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we conclude, I would like to call upon a past president of the Columbus Bar Association, a member of our executive committee, Lorraine Moore, to offer brief comments about the River Center's generosity in furnishing us with this facility. Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning. On behalf of the Executive Committee of the Columbus Bar Association, I'm here to just reiterate our gratitude to the River Center, as well as the Springer Opera House for use of this facility. Both the River Center and the Springer offered to us to use their facilities to host this event. That's especially generous considering both of them have been shut down for the past 6 months. So to those members who may be inclined, we'd ask that you consider making a donation to their respective COVID relief funds. You can find details on how to make the donation on their respective websites. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Judge McBride, at this time, I would formally move that we adjourn this meeting.
Again, thank you, Judge Lynn. As we bring this meeting to a close this morning, I would ask that you permit me one more time to say thank you to each person who is here today. I do note that during the course of the program, we have also been joined by Judge Thomas Lakes, probate judge of Harris County. Judge Amy Walters is here from Muskogee County Magistrate Court. I also note that we have been joined by Representative Debbie Buckner and Representative Vance Smith. I see State Court Judge Ben Richardson, and I see our District Attorney, Julia Slater, who is here also. So again, thank you so much for joining us, to our fellow public servants. I do want to say a special word to the families who are here. It is meaningful to have each and all of you here today, and I hope that it's been meaningful to you as well to see the esteem and the genuine affection and respect for which your loved ones were held by this bench and by this bar. I would ask now that at this time the families make their way, that they exit from the hall, that you go and be seated, please, at tables in the lobby that have been prepared for you, so that those who are here to pay tribute in person to your loved one can in fact join you and greet you in a socially distanced and safe way. We have taken that precaution. I would ask that everyone else remain seated in the hall as we bring our program to a close, and that the families be recessed at this time to the lobby. And for those of us who remain in the hall, we will be dismissed in just a few minutes to greet family members. As noted, they will be seated and spaced out around the lobby of the River Center. I do want to thank Judge Land for his leadership here today in organizing what is a very different memorial program for most of us. We have all experienced these before. We're always moved by the tributes that we hear. but this year's program presented some unique challenges, as you have heard and as you certainly understand. I also wish to thank the Executive Committee and the leadership of the Columbus Bar Association. I will not attempt to recognize all of them here today, but they are here, and I believe they know that they are appreciated. They're spread about this hall, and they have assisted with the organization of this program. I must acknowledge as well Judge Bill Rimmer, who is unable to be here today. He does send regards and regrets and appreciation for the service of the colleagues we have memorialized. We do have multiple courts going forward at different locations across the circuit today, and it is simply not always possible for all who would like to be here to be in attendance, but they do send regards. Also, thank you so much, Sheriff, again, for your able assistance, for the security you have provided, the many hours of organization that have gone in today's proceeding, and again, thank you so much to the River Center. We simply and quite literally could not have done this without your able assistance. At the end of the day, as I have noted, this is finally for all of us a meaningful time. But it is preceded by many hours of hard work by many other persons. So thank you to all who I may have missed. To those members of the bar who presented resolutions today in memory of our fallen brethren, we are grateful. Thank you. As we look about the auditorium today, I think we'll see a hall that is perhaps has more people than we thought we would have. Even with distance spacing and with the seating arrangements that we're forced to have for these times that we're in. We also have many more who are participating by live stream, and we appreciate their participation today. We should keep in our thoughts, we should keep in our prayers as we close, our friends and our colleagues, Melvin Cooper and Tommy Greer, whose wishes we have honored in this way with this simple and brief word of remembrance at this time. We all know others who have passed away over the last few weeks and months. I assure you that they will be memorialized at this hour on the first Monday of October of 2021. Now, in just a few moments, I will exit, as are the other judges. We will exit in reverse order in which we came onto the stage, and then after that, we will stand adjourned. Before we leave, I must ask that the members of the audience who remain take direction from the sheriff, who will give some guidance specifically for you to exit section by section so that you can spend a few brief moments in conversation with the family members who are gathered in the lobby, and then make your way from the building. Thank you again. At this point, I will turn the balance of the program back over to Sheriff Tompkins. Sheriff.
All rise, please. The session will be ended. We will begin with our elected officials on my right to exit once the judges leave the stage. We will then move to the center and then to the left. Please allow for social distancing, and that way each person can have a few moments with the families of those sitting at tables outside. Beginning on our right. Those of you in the center can go to your right or left to exit. And lastly, those on the left. Thank you.